I love coffee, I love tea, I love the Jaffa Jive and it loves me. Coffee and tea and the Java and me. A cup, a cup, a cup, a cup, a cup. I love.
Hi, welcome to another Coffee with Connie. This Coffee with Connie is concerning the upper and lower lakes in Yaphank and the invasive species that have spread like wildfire in the lakes. The problem with invasives in the Yaphank Lakes is a long-standing one. According to residents who live along the lake, and I quote, "It's been well over 30 years that the weeds have been in the lakes." I was asked to get involved in the Yaphank Lakes in 2007. At the December 4th, 2007 board meeting, I introduced Resolution 1128, and that resolution was a resolution to create a Commons River working group. The goal of this working group was to find a solution to eradicate the invasive species in both the upper and lower lakes in Yaphank. The working group consisted of the following individuals and organizations. The New York State Senator from District 1, Senator Ken LaValle, the Assemblyman from the 3rd District, County Legislator Kate Browning, myself, a designee from Brookhaven's Division of Environmental Protection, Mr. Anthony Graves, a representative from the New York State DEC, Mr. Daniel Lewis, who was very helpful on this committee, a representative from Suffolk County Health Services, Suffolk County Public Works, and Suffolk County Planning, a representative from both the Yaphank Taxpayers Civic Association, Fran Hurley, and the South Yaphank Civic Association, Joanne McConnell, and representatives from non-governmental environmental organizations such as Trout Unlimited, George Koska, and Doug Swetsty, and the Open Space Council, Mr. Marty Van Lith, and representatives from residents who live adjacent to the lakes, including Audrey and Bob Kessler, and Chad and Steve Trosnebeck. Okay, and I got to select the chairperson of the committee, and I reached out to the immensely qualified Adrienne Espositio, who is the executive director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment.
Right.
And Adrienne graciously and happily agreed to chair the committee.
This is clearly revisionist history. When I reached out, she means strong-armed, and I not so eagerly agreed to chair this committee, although I'm happy I did.
Yes, because you did an excellent job. It was, as you heard earlier, a very diverse committee with a lot of divergent interests on the committee, and all of them were vocal. But in the end, the committee did come together and decide on a solution. And that was very much to the credit of Adrienne. So I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy to be of service.
So I want to start out with some of the basics as far as the invasives. How did they get into the lake? First of all, what are the invasives in the lake?
The invasive aquatic plant species in the lake are kabamba and also variable leaf milfoil. And actually, these are very, very common invasives now all over Long Island. So it's not just Yaphank Lakes. This is occurring, unfortunately, all over. The DEC told us that 80% of the freshwater lakes have these two particular species in them. So how they got there, no one knows for sure. Some people believe that there was a transportation of when people would change the water out in their personal aquariums, that they dumped them in there. They could be the seeds dropped by birds. These plant species are very tenacious because if you just rip off a piece of them, then the remaining pieces grow back very quickly. So even if they are transported by birds and other animals and planted from one water body to another, they're just going to regrow.
They just take over.
Yes.
And if the viewers haven't seen Yaphank Lakes, in the midsummer or high season, it almost looks as if you can walk across the lakes, that they're so covered with these invasive plants.
Yeah, it's choking out the lakes. I mean, by the time the community members are saying, I don't want my dog in the lake because I'm afraid it will get strangled, it's a pretty aggressive plant.
Right. And, one of the first things that I remember that the working group did was we brought in experts that had looked at this issue in other regions, and we interviewed them. So can you tell us who those people were and what they told us?
Well, it was interesting because we thought, naively, how hard could this be?
Yes, we did think that.
We did think that at first. That was the wrong question to ask. So we thought, well, we'll just ask other people who have faced the same challenge.
Yes.
So we brought in people from Massachusetts, people from upstate New York,
Yes.
and apparently it's quite challenging to get rid of this species. We brought in scientists, we brought in consultants mostly from the Northeast. They didn't come from far and wide, and they all said the same thing, that you really have limited choices. There's pesticides, there's dredging, there's hand suction devices to remove them by hand. It was,
Yes.
there were a lot of options, but when you got right down to it, the real choices were limited.
Yes. Yes. Okay, and we then, one of the biggest and most time-consuming, I think, efforts of the working group was to write the outline for the feasibility study. And that was a all-encompassing outline. We studied, in that feasibility study, they studied the ecological impacts of the lakes.
But I have to say, the people on the committee really deserve a lot of credit. They
Yes.
really do. We looked at everything. We went through what would the water quality be, what would the impact to the wildlife be,
Right.
what would the impact to the bottom sediments, to the benthic organisms, to
Right.
bird life, to water flow, to the Commons River, because obviously these lakes are at the headwaters of the Commons River, recreational impacts, fishing impacts. We looked at everything, and it was an exhaustive list to be analyzed and studied, and then we had to take that list and study the impact to those items with every choice that we went through. So one choice was to drain the lakes and allow the bottom to freeze for 2 consecutive winters. And we had to say, what were the choices, what would the impacts be to all those items on our study list? We obviously didn't choose that one. We couldn't even count on the fact the lakes would freeze for 2 consecutive
That was the
winters.
drawdown
And it was called the
alternative?
drawdown alternative, where basically you would drain the lakes of every drop of water, which would be very tricky considering they're 90% groundwater fed.
Right. I mean, one of the things that came up that was surprising to me is that periodically, the lower lake at least, they did draw it down. They opened up that dam
Yep.
by the southern end of Lower Lake, and they would draw it down and expose the bottom.
Right.
And most of the residents who have been there for generations say that's what kept the invasives out for many, many years. But that ended up not to be an option because there was a wetlands on the southern end of that dam that we would have disturbed.
Yep. See, the problem was, and still is, that every choice that you make has some impact.
Right.
I mean, every remediation effort is going to have some adverse environmental or recreational or societal impact.
Right.
So what we had to do was look at all the choices and pick the one that was the least impacting in those 3 categories.
Right.
And that's what made it tricky.
Right.
I mean, let's face it, to get rid of this invasive weed that has completely taken over the habitat of Upper and Lower Lake, it's, you're not gonna wave a magic wand. The magic wand to get rid of Kabamba has not yet been invented.
Yes.
So we had to do something that was real today. The dredging, we feel, was the best option because it would get rid of the seed base. And the reason the drawdown didn't work in Lower Lake repeatedly is because the variable leaf milfoil, which is predominant in that lake, had a big enough seed base, so it kept coming back. It really made its home in that lake.
We did look for quite a long time at the alternative of herbicides.
Yes.
And we were looking at fluoridone, I think it was.
Yes.
Which is the product name is Sonar.
Yes.
And they had used that, I know you were involved in this, they had used that in the Peconic.
Yes.
And how successful or not successful was that effort?
They used it not in the river, but in a pond.
In the pond, yes.
Donahue's Pond.
Right.
In the Peconic. And, you know, they came, I serve on a county committee where you have to get permission to do such things. And they went through, you know, we're just gonna do it once, it's a one-shot deal. And finally our committee said, okay, if you're gonna do it once. We did it once, it worked for about 1.5 years, then it came back.
Yes.
So it turned out it was coming from the upper reaches, they never checked the upper reaches. And it was traveling down and getting a foothold again in the pond. So then they wanted to do it again. And then they needed to do patchwork. So it worked for a short amount of time, but it turned out to not be a long-term solution.
How is that pond now? Is it,
No, now it's good. I mean, it's not bad,
Mhm.
but it seems like every 3 or 4 years, and I'm just making an assessment right now. This is not definitive, but they'll probably need to do something else. But they did nothing else. They didn't
Okay.
dredge.
Right.
They didn't remove the seed base.
Right.
They're not going in with the suction
Right.
gadgets to remove it. They're not really. They're just relying on one remedy.
Okay, right.
And I would say if we found out one thing through this 6 years of research,
Yes.
it's that there isn't just a magic pill. You have to put together a combination of responses
Right.
that will rid the ecosystem.
And in
of plants.
certain other areas, I mean, a number of years back in Middle Island, in the lakes up in Middle Island, they used a dye. So in Otis Lake, they put a dye in there. And I know we talked about that, but unfortunately for a river that's flowing, that was not an option. But it
Right.
did work well.
Right.
It does work well for the lakes, to put a dye in, and that works by, it just blocks the sunlight
Right.
and the plants die.
That's right. But when you do that, you have to remember, you kill everything.
Yes,
So part of it is you kill all the plant life.
right,
Now, so does dredging though.
yes,
So, these are tough choices, but what's happening anyway right now is the kabamba and the variable leaf milfoil, they grow up out of the bottom,
right,
and they're growing so tall and so quickly that they're pushing the native species like the lily pad
Right.
that we want there
yes,
up out of the water. They dry out and die.
uh-huh,
So now they're dying anyway.
yes,
So, there are no good choices, but we had to make a choice. If the lakes were going to be saved, the committee had to make a choice.
yes.
Doing nothing meant the lakes died,
Mhm.
and that didn't seem like a good option either.
No,
So.
no, not for the majority of the committee.
No.
And I know there was a contingent on the committee, particularly at the beginning of our process, that was very much in favor of dam removal.
Yes.
And that was not chosen as an alternative, I think primarily because the people of Yaphank were very, very much opposed to that. They have a very, very long history with their lakes.
I'm laughing because this was a huge controversy.
Yes, it was.
And look, I'm an environmentalist. I'm supposed to say, yes, let's
Yes.
remove the dams. Because if you remove the dams, the water flows. The plants would obviously not be able to sustain themselves in that flowing water.
Mhm.
But talk about throwing the baby out with the
Yes,
bathwater, you
yes.
lose the lakes. So
Yes.
you lose the invasive species, but you lose the lakes.
Right, right.
And so it was very clear, and I think it's very important. There is a community identity. There is a sense of place in Yaphank that is provided by these lakes.
Mhm.
The lakes are the
Yes,
heart of the
absolutely.
community.
Yes,
You don't destroy the lakes to solve the problem.
Mhm.
The problem was presented, how do we save the lakes?
right,
The committee wasn't there to figure out how to destroy the lakes. Lakes have historical, societal, and environmental value.
mhm,
And those are 3 values that are worth fighting for.
yes,
So I as chair and as my organization, we did not support
Mhm.
removal of the dams.
mhm,
Would it solve the problem? Sure.
mhm.
You also lose the
Lose the
lakes.
Right, right.
That didn't seem like a very good solution
No,
to us.
And the problem with that, most people don't realize, once you take the dam away, you would have a free-flowing river that would be surrounded by muck
Yes,
and
exactly right.
wetlands. So, you have a whole community that was built around the lakes, since the 1700s.
That's right.
So that would really destroy their most cherished resource, which was the lakes.
Well, and the other thing I think it would do is diminish house values.
Oh, yes.
So you're gonna have lower property
Yeah,
values, you're
yeah.
gonna take away this, cultural
Right,
and
right.
environmental resource.
Mhm.
So we rejected
We
that
rejected that
choice.
one.
Yep.
We also looked at, one of my favorite alternative was the invasive eating fish. That didn't work too well in other places. Where did they try that? They tried it in Patchogue?
It's
or-
not a bad, it came in Lake and Patch, I put
Yes.
in the carp, and they're sterile carp.
Uh-huh.
So they put them in, the carp are voracious eaters.
Uh-huh.
Eat the plant life, they're sterile so they can't reproduce, even
Right.
though they're not a native species. And then eventually they get fished out, because they're not reproducing.
Right.
The problem here is that they would be traveling down the Comets River.
Uh,
So that wouldn't work either, because you can't put them in, expect them to eat the plants and then go down the river. What if they go down the river first?
Right.
But it's not a bad idea, and it is used in some places, and it's used as part of the solution, not the totality of the solution, but it didn't work for this particular system.
Right.
These are all the
Yes.
things that we had to
I know.
assess and evaluate.
Yes. So we did choose dredging as the alternative, and obviously it's going on right now. One of our late surprises was that we had to rush around and find the dredge spoil sites. We were looking at the U.S. Rail as the primary alternative for our dredge spoil site. That fell through in the end, to no fault of anybody on the committee.
No.
We were told some things that ended up not to be true. So then we had to run around and find alternative sites, which was not an easy thing to do at the last minute. And we looked.
And when Connie says we, she means her and her staff, who literally went to almost every business and every property owner around those lakes to see who could help, right?
Yes.
That was really a great job.
And it was an extensive effort. I remember having in this conference room, we had aerial maps, and we're looking at every parcel of open space near the lake, and eliminated one after another. So we ended up looking at two remained really. It was that brush development and Froelich property,
Right.
which really are, I think, dredge spoil sites, because we didn't have to clear the area. They were already cleared, they were already disturbed, and so that's where the dredge spoils are going.
Right.
And the process has started. They are currently dredging the lakes. They first started with something I'm very familiar with, which was the harvester. So they first harvested the lakes.
Right.
We did try that, by the way, as an alternative. It didn't work very well. But this harvester was a lot bigger than ours, and they harvested all of these species in Upper Lake, and now they started the dredging process.
Right.
And it is an enormous engineering project. I mean, just the laying of the pipes was also an issue, because the dredge spoil, which is the muck.
Right.
So
It's really
it's
just
not
bottomlands.
It's bottom.
Yeah.
It's just the muck on the bottom. It's bottom of the river, and that will be sent to the dredge spoil sites through pipes, which have been laid down the river and then up East Main to the dredge spoil sites. Okay, and we did try to make this a very, very inclusive process. Can you expand on that?
I think this was an extremely open process, and I say that as someone who advocates for transparency in government. So we had large-scale community meetings. Some of them, there was 150, 200 people came. All of our meetings were noticed, and many of them in the newspaper. People came from all over just to listen or to participate.
We had an audience at these meetings.
We had an audience at these meetings. The consultant who did the feasibility study, Nelson Pope and Voorhees, they had large-scale community meetings.
Yes.
We had meetings at the firehouse, we had meetings at town hall. It was filled with really a lot of community engagement. Many of the civics were involved constantly. So the neighbors of the lake were all involved. So I really feel like this was a collaborative community effort that came together for a common cause of saving the lakes.
And we are very hopeful that the dredging process will rid us of the invasive species and give back to the residents of Yaphank their very, very beautiful and cherished lakes. So thank you so much, Adrienne. You were a great chair.
Thank you.
And the next time I need a chair, I know where to go.
I think my number's changed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.